Well, now to the battle against the radical Islamic terrorists overseas. The president facing a bit of a dilemma as he works on a campaign promise to destroy ISIS and Syria and Iraq. You know, tensions have been escalating between the U.S., Russia, and Moscow's ally, Syria, over those recent U.S. military strikes against Syrian government forces. And if that were not enough, yesterday Israel fired back over the Syrian border after it says projectiles from the fighting landed in the Golan Heights. Several Syrian tanks were reportedly destroyed. So could this conflict spread to a wider war, and what steps should the Trump administration take next? Ambassador John Bolton is a former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Fox News contributor, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and chairman of the Gatestone Institute here in New York. You know, Ambassador, I was on the Syrian border in the Golan Heights on Thursday, visiting Israel and Jordan. And, you know, people there were optimistic about the fight against ISIS. But they do have a concern that the conflict between Washington, Moscow, Damascus, and more importantly, Tehran, could potentially spread. So how do you think the administration should handle this?
Well, I think this is a very serious situation. I think it has two main aspects. The first is the failure of American strategy in dealing with ISIS to begin with. By relying on the Iraqi government, which is effectively a satellite of the Ayatollahs in Tehran, they have allowed Iran to set the stage to link up with the Assad regime in Syria, Hezbollah, and other terrorist groups. And we find Russia allied with Syria and Iran. So in our efforts against ISIS, we're putting ourselves right in the middle of this coalition effort that's being put together without really being prepared for it. And so that's why these conflicts, it's a very complicated battlefield there, politically and militarily. And I don't think we thought that through when we started this strategy of helping.
How can we prepare for it? What should we do?
Well, I think it ties into the second element, which is once ISIS is defeated, and it will be defeated, the only question is when. It should be sooner rather than later. But once it's defeated, it will leave a power vacuum, and Iran and the Assad regime and Russia and Hezbollah will move to try and fill it. That's why I think what we need to do is get more Arab forces involved, not the Iraqi forces under the influence of Iran, but from Egypt, Jordan, the Gulf monarchies. They have a big stake here, too, maybe even bigger than ours. They have not participated in this fight as much as they should have. In fact, some of them have been on the side of ISIS, if you believe press reports. We can turn that around, or at least we should try and turn it around, or we will simply find that after defeating ISIS, in the post-ISIS environment, we're seeing the foundation laid for the next war.
And if you talk about the next war, I mean, if that vacuum is not filled by our allies, what then?
Well, it will be filled by Iran, by the Iran-controlled Baghdad government and Shia militia, the Alawite regime under Bashar al-Assad in Syria, and Hezbollah, all backed by Russia. So this is, I think this requires strategic thinking as we move to the conclusion of the struggle against ISIS to get the right structures and forces in place, and then to think about what we want the region to look like after it's defeated. Giving these Sunni areas in western Iraq and eastern Syria back to a Shia-dominated Baghdad government on the one hand, or the Assad regime on the other, I think is a non-starter. It's just going to mean more conflict sooner rather than later.
Well, do you think that's even a possibility or a probability?
Well, as far as I can tell, what we seem to be aiming at is to assist. It's unbelievable to me that we're doing this, but to assist the Baghdad government to retake everything within the former borders of Iraq, which will simply extend Iranian influence directly to the border with Syria. And it's not clear what we're going to do with the Syrian opposition, what's going to happen with the Kurds. I just don't think this was well thought out in the Obama administration, and worryingly, it's not apparently thought out in this administration either.
You're hitting something that's so important because it's what's called the Shiite crescent. It's the influence of Iran, all the way from Tehran, right through Yemen. We see it in the Saudi battle against the Houthis, right on through, as you say, Iraq and Syria to Lebanon. And when you're standing on the Golan Heights looking at the border, you see Syria, you're right there at the town, and you see Lebanon, and you see the threat, especially considering that Hezbollah is right across the border.
Right, and on a clear day you can see Damascus. And I think one thing Israel definitely doesn't want, with all of its other problems, is Iran or Iranian-backed forces on its border there at the Golan Heights. So this is very serious. It's serious for Israel. It's serious for the Gulf Arab oil-producing monarchies. very serious for the United States, too. We need a strategy to deal with the final defeat of ISIS and then for the Middle East post-ISIS.
And do you think that strategy could come in the reported potential a summit meeting at Camp David? My colleague, as you know, Ben Advansky here, saying that there's thought at the White House for this type of Camp David summit of our Arab allies dealing with this. Let me read you what we wrote, saying, quote, a Middle Eastern expert who is close to the White House told Fox News that the meeting being discussed would be a move to restore American alliances weakened during the Obama years. The White House plans are being formulated partly in response to calls in the Middle East for reinvigorated American leadership. So what do you think that reinvigorated American leadership could finally look like? And do you think a Camp David type summit that we've seen before when dealing with the Middle East could potentially have some success?
Well, I think such a summit could be very useful, and to have the Arab leaders there, and, you know, if you really want to go for it, have Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel there, too. Look, our Arab friends in the region for 8 years were pulling their hair out as they watched Barack Obama's tilt toward Iran, the central banker of international terrorism, country pursuing nuclear weapons, and by the way, it still is despite the Iran nuclear agreement. I think they're heartened by the direction the Trump administration has taken, certainly by the words of the president. But I think you need a lot more than just the president's rhetoric. He needs to move his bureaucracy in the direction of reasserting American influence in the region and making it clear to Iran that the foundation they are trying to lay in that arc of control from Iran to the Mediterranean through their assistance to the Houthis in Yemen to get ready for the next battle against the Sunnis and the Arabs, that we are not going to let that happen.
And that could be the focus of that purported Camp David summit. If it comes, we will be on it, of course. Ambassador John Bolton, always good to see you on our Sunday.